Welcome back, parents and educators and all of those lovely, caring adults that are in the lives of neurodivergent kids. I am so thankful that you're here and listening today. I have with me Dr. Melisa Moore, and we are going to talk about something that many, many of our neurodiverse families find so confounding and frustrating, and that is sleep and sleep struggles. My own kid really struggled with sleep, better now as a young adult, but still sometimes can become problematic. So I'm looking so forward to sharing your insights and your strategies with everyone. Will you start, though, by letting everybody know who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm a clinical psychologist, and my passion really is helping families be the best rested that they can possibly be. Um, I've been doing this for 2 decades, and I was doing it for 10 years before I ever had my kids, one of whom is neurodivergent and has sleep problems. So I'm really seeing it from both sides. And I know how difficult and important sleep can be for so many families, including my own.
Yeah. Can we start by really talking about why neurodivergent individuals have more struggles with sleep and maybe what that looks like?
Sure, there are a lot of reasons, and I just want to start by saying bad parenting or lazy kids are not in that list. But there are biological reasons. So neurodiverse kids are wired a little bit differently, and that's part of what makes them so wonderfully neurodiverse. But whatever that wiring is, can also lead to differences in sleep. So there's kind of the overall biology. The second thing is circadian rhythm. So we all have the clock in our brain that tells us when we should be sleeping, when we should be awake. And research really shows us that in kids with ADHD in particular, that circadian rhythm can be pushed a little bit later. And in kids with autism, people with autism, that circadian rhythm can be not so consistent. And so that's another reason. The third reason is really comorbid things that ride alongside car with neurodiversity. So things like anxiety, depression, medical conditions like reflux, asthma, those things get in the way of sleep as well. And then the last thing is sleep disorders. So there are specific sleep disorders that are more common in certain conditions. So there's something called restless leg syndrome, or periodic limb movement disorder. Those are two disorders of restless sleep, we call them, but they're more common in neurodiverse kids. And the thing is, with
Mm.
a lot of this, we don't know why. It just is.
And it's so interesting. I'm glad you brought up the fact that there's always a lot of comorbidities that are following with, like, I would refer to my son as an alphabet soup, right? He has all the different like acronyms and things, and there's so many things that come with this neurodivergence a lot of times. And so I find it fascinating that sleep disorders like restless leg are also more common. I
Hmm.
have restless leg myself, so I understand what that's like. And I find it interesting too that, like, for ADHD, the circadian rhythm is later, whereas with autism, it might be inconsistent. And I hadn't ever heard that before. So that's in all the years I've been obsessed with neurodivergence and helping my own family and my own kids, I haven't heard that. So I'm so glad that you're sharing it. Talk to us a little bit about balancing. You say balance the ideal with the family's real. And I love that because that's should be our mantra for neurodivergent parenting, really. But like,
Yeah.
what does that mean as far as sleep? And how do we get there?
Great question. We all know the ideals in terms of lots of areas of health. We know we're supposed to reapply sunscreen every 2 hours. We know we're supposed to floss our teeth every day. That's not the problem. The problem is fitting it in to the complexity of our real lives. And the same
Mhm.
is true with sleep. Um, we have to balance the habits that are ideal with, again, the complexities of our lives. And so striving for perfection in that way is not always going to be helpful. And a lot of the recommendations that are out there for sleep are based on the ideal. So finding out really what are the core things that we're looking at and how can we adapt those things for our own kids and our own families. I like to really think of things as good, better, best, especially when I work with
Mm,
teenagers. But like, if you can't achieve perfection, it's okay. Just take a little step in the right direction, and that can be really helpful too.
yeah. We're all about taking small steps here.
Mhm,
That
mhm.
is the way that we make change
Exactly.
um, without kind of those crazy pie in the sky goals. We've got to break it down to make it doable. You
Yeah.
talk about some core ideas or core pieces of good sleep. Can you share some of those with us?
Sure. Um, Sleep hygiene or sleep habit, I'm sure everybody has heard about, and that is really important, and I'll talk about that. But um, it's important to start there. It's a good foundation. Oftentimes, it's not enough. But for example, start with having a bedtime and a bedtime routine. A bedtime routine really, even though it might not seem like it, is critical in helping, especially neurodivergent kids, wind down. Um, and so those are two things, a bedtime and a bedtime routine. I would start there. There are two parts to kind of falling asleep. There's the calming down part, and then there's the eyes closed, actually falling off into sleep part. And the calming down part, I think we can be a little bit flexible on and individualize. So find out what works to calm your child down and don't worry what the ideal is or what you've been told. Other elements of sleep hygiene have been studied honestly in shockingly specific detail. So for adults, we know the ideal temperature of the room for sleep is 68 degrees. For kids, it's generally more around 70. But again, some of our kids are really sensitive to temperature. They're too hot, they're too cold. Um, the room should be quiet. I'm very pro sound machine or even like a noisy fan, something to block out those noises, which can be so disruptive, especially for neurodiverse kids. Um, and another thing that we don't think about a lot is communicating the expectations around sleep. When I ask families about bedtime and bedtime routines, a lot of times they're like, then we get ready for bed and go to bed. But that involves so many things. And when you think
Yes.
about it from the perspective of a neurodiverse kid, they're stopping probably something that they want to do for something they don't want to do. The bedtime routine from a sensory perspective can just be fraught with difficult things, brushing teeth, those hygiene things. Um, and so we're really trying to find out what is the best thing to help our kids really calm down. But I would start with the bedtime and the bedtime routine and go from there.
Yeah. And really, I just want to reiterate the idea that we need to have an open mind about what might calm down our kids.
Yes.
Because for a
Yeah.
lot of them, it's more activity, it's more sensory input, right? And so
Yes.
that can be confusing for adults who don't share that sensory profile. Um,
Exactly.
but it's
And I
really
think
important.
one area where I sometimes feel like lately I'm going to be struck by lightning if I talk about it, in general, I don't recommend electronics. That's not something that I think is helpful for most kids.
Mhm.
However, the latest research really shows that there are some nuances there. And for some kids that really have trouble winding down, slowing down their minds, calming down, certain shows or whatever it is might actually help them fall asleep faster because it helps distract them enough to be able to allow sleep to arrive.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's my kid. And it took a really long time to be okay with like YouTube videos playing in the background while he was going to sleep. It seemed like it was a big parenting fail. Everybody was going to say that was the worst thing to do, but it works. And he's 23 now and he still does it because it works for him. And we have,
Yeah.
he goes to sleep so much faster that way. And so that open mind is so key to what
Yeah.
that really looks like. I want to talk
And I
a
would
little
say
bit
don't have
about,
guilt
okay.
about it. Like don't have guilt about the
Mm,
things that help your child calm down. They are what they are.
yeah. Yeah. Just be open to it and accepting. Can we talk about, you say to tell our kids wait for sleep instead of try to go to sleep, which sounds like a really great idea, actually. So can you tell us more about that? Why does that language even matter?
There is literally nothing that we can do to force ourselves to fall asleep except anesthesia, which hopefully, we don't have at our houses. But we can't force it. And so to try to go to sleep kind of adds extra pressure. And all we really can do is set up the right condition and wait for sleep to arrive. And when we use that language, it's not only more accurate, but I feel like it takes a little bit of the pressure off. And, it's normal to take 10, 20, 30, sometimes even 40 minutes to fall asleep. If you fall asleep when your head hits the pillow, you're really too sleep deprived. And so during that time that you're waiting for sleep, again, that time is normal. We want to look at things that might be getting in the way. So like anxious thoughts, inventing the next International Space Station, things that our kids are thinking about and that are getting in the way of sleep. But when we use the language, wait for sleep, again, I just think that's more accurate and sets up an expectation that is what's going on.
Hmm. Reducing pressure is so key for our kids because there's so much pressure day to day, more so for them than I think a lot of neurotypical kids. And a lot of pressure is dysregulating. It's gonna be
Yeah,
really hard to fall asleep if you're dysregulated, if you're worried, if you're feeling like, you're missing something, you're not doing something right because it takes you so long to fall asleep and mom and dad get so frustrated, and you start blaming yourself. None of that's helpful for sleep or anything else, right? And so I love this
exactly.
idea of waiting for sleep and being okay with waiting. I struggle with falling asleep myself. It takes me a really long time. And so the more I get upset about not going to sleep, like if I have something early in the morning or, I just really want to be rested, I get really upset. And the more upset I get, the longer it takes me to fall asleep. And I've had to really
Exactly.
train myself to be like, it is
Exactly.
what it is. It
The
comes when it
irony is the
comes.
harder you try, the less likely it is to happen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, you know, we want that effort to not be part of falling asleep if it at all possible.
You talk a little bit too about finding strategies that both calm and occupy the mind. And I
Mhm.
found this really interesting too. And I think maybe it dovetails a little bit into the idea of like my son playing YouTube videos in the background. Like he says
Exactly.
it's because he needs something to focus on. So his brain isn't running a million miles an hour.
That's actually the perfect explanation. And I learned this through the families, the kids, the parent that I've worked with over the years, that the right level of distraction is key. And it goes back to that period of waiting. So what do you do while you're waiting? For some kids, they're ruminating. They're, getting excited about what they're going to build with Legos the next day or, features of a video game or a school project or whatever. And while we're waiting for sleep, the best brain, I say to kids, is calm. So you don't want to be excited or anxious. You want to keep your brain and body calm, but also busy. So if your brain has the right amount of distraction, which means being engaged enough. So like counting sheep doesn't work for anybody. It's too easy. It's not really distracting or engaging your brain. Maybe counting back from 100 by threes might be engaging enough. Um, but it really, again, depends on what is distracting enough for your child. For some kids, it's thinking about, all the colors of the rainbow and everything they can imagine in that color. So like red, you might think of fire truck, stop sign, cherries. And then you go on to the next color. And that helps a lot of little kids. For other kids that I've had, it might be like all the features of a lawnmower or all the different kinds of lawnmowers that are out there. Again, for kids that are into math, a lot of those math tricks that we do can be helpful. But really, in order for sleep to come, there has to be a space for it. And that space comes from being distracted enough to just allow it to arrive.
That waiting part is so
Mm-hmm.
hard. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, something that requires thought. So
Mm-hmm.
not as simple as counting sheep because our
Mm-hmm.
mind can still wander, but something that
Right.
requires some thought. Interesting. Yeah. I have actually started listening to podcasts with sleep headphones to go to sleep because
Mm-hmm.
I do. I ruminate about everything for
Right.
hours if I don't. And I started with like there's podcasts meant to be boring enough to help you go to sleep. And it didn't work for me. I was still thinking about all the things, right? And so I was like,
Right.
I'm gonna take a page from my kid's playbook and I'm just gonna see. And lo and behold, it works great. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about this because it's just
Yeah.
not something that people would normally think about. You know, it seems to be the opposite of what we think is required.
Right. And I might not have even thought about that myself if it weren't for the families that I work with and my experience with my son. One thing that I did want to bring up related to this is the idea of sleep associations, because that can be something that you also want to consider when you're thinking about how to fall asleep. We all have sleep cycles. So we go through light sleep, deep sleep, dream sleep, or REM sleep, and then our brains wake up. And that happens about 4 to 6 times per night. So in general, most of us are just so good at getting ourselves right back to sleep, we don't even know that it happened. I know I don't remember waking up 4 or 6 times last night. But the key is that whatever you have to fall asleep in the first place, if you don't have it during the night, it can be more difficult to get yourself right back to sleep. So if your challenge or your child's challenge is night wakings, then you might want to think a little bit about how to keep whatever it is that they have to fall asleep, how to keep that the same or consistent all night long.
That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I
Mm-hmm.
don't leave mine playing all night, but my son does. He leaves
Well,
his
I
playing all
think if
night.
if if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. But if you're
Right.
seeing night wakings, I see a lot of families that come to me for night wakings, and when I say let's start with bedtime, then they feel like I'm really not hearing them, and I am. But it's just that the most effective way to deal with night wakings is to start with bedtime.
Yeah. 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 Start with good habits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do parents determine what their specific child's needs are around sleep?
Parents are the experts in their child. Um, and so I know that there are recommendations from very reputable, medical associations, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Sleep Foundation. They do provide recommendations in terms of the number of hours that kids need. I recommend looking more at how your child is functioning during the day. So do they wake up on their own, ready to go? Are they irritable and feel like they've been hit by a truck when they first wake up? Are they falling asleep during school or during their therapies? How are they doing during the day? And we have to keep in mind that especially with younger kids, sleepiness doesn't necessarily look like being lethargic and low energy and fatigued. It might look like extra irritable, hyperactive,
Yeah.
inattentive. Um, but I think you know your child and you know when they're in their best kind of level of functioning. And I would really go by that.
Let's talk about teens a little bit. We have a lot of listeners who have teens and young
Mhm.
adults. What is different, or what should we think about differently, maybe for teens who are struggling with sleep? I think that we don't build our systems around the way teens want to be awake and be asleep. And that's something that we really don't have control over. But talk to us more about teens and sleep.
Yeah, again, as I said in the beginning, but specifically for teens, it's not bad behavior, it's biology. So, one thing that a lot of people don't know is that there's a normal shift in your circadian rhythm sometime around puberty. And this is not just in the United States. This has been studied in Hong Kong, Australia, Russia, France. This is true for teenagers all across the globe. So, whereas maybe they were okay falling asleep at 9 o'clock a couple of years ago, now they might not be ready for sleep until 10 or 11. And so there's this unfortunate natural shift in biology that school and society hasn't, made space for. And so even though they might not be tired until later, they still have to get up for school. And so we do have to kind of push back against that. And the way that we try to do that is by not really napping too much during the day and not oversleeping on the weekends. But for teens, that's really hard. The other thing is, I think about this all the time, there are recommendations out there that, for example, people stop using electronics 2 hours before bedtime. But our teenagers with homework, their homework is generally on a screen, and
Yeah.
that is just not possible. So, the other thing is that adolescence is really a period of time when teenagers want to be more on their own, want to be more alone. And that is a normal part of development. Um, but we know from the research that still having parents involved in what time kids go to bed is really important. So I feel like teenagers kind of have the odds stacked against them. And what we can do is gently kind of keep their circadian rhythm as consistent with school times as we can, and just get through adolescence.
Yeah. Sometimes it is just about getting through, right? Just
Yeah.
doing the best you can and getting through.
Yep.
Can we talk about things that we might add, we might bring in to help with sleep? You talked about a sound machine or some white noise, but I also want to talk about things like supplements like melatonin or magnesium. We've tried many things over the years and some have helped and some haven't, but I wonder how useful you think some of these things are.
So I'm really guided by the science and the research. I really use that as my North Star, even though I know sometimes we have to go beyond that. But when you look at the research on melatonin, for example, it's very well studied, especially in neurodivergent kids. And there is a lot of misinformation out there about melatonin. It doesn't stop your brain from producing its own melatonin. It's not physiologically, biologically habit forming. Um, it is not going to lead to delays or problems necessarily with puberty. It's been very well studied in neurodivergent kids and even in the long term. And so, what the research shows us is that there aren't any consistent side effects from melatonin. If your child is experiencing side effects, or if you feel like the melatonin is not working anymore, it's probably from something else that was in that supplement. Supplements are not FDA regulated in this country, and it is suggested that supplement companies report all the other things that are in the supplement, but I don't know that anyone's really checking up on that. And so I'm going to give you two examples. One is an older study that shows that a lot of melatonin supplement might have a little bit of Benadryl in them, and you
Hmm.
can get used to Benadryl. After, a few nights of using Benadryl, it doesn't make you as sleepy as it once did. Well, second thing is this summer, a study came out looking at the gummies. And I know gummies are so easy for most kids to take, but only 10% of the melatonin gummies had the melatonin that they said were in there. So I think if you're going to do melatonin, I would use a chewable or a liquid or another form, not the gummies. And if a particular brand isn't working for you, I would just try a different brand before you give up. So that's melatonin. Magnesium is kind of the new thing that people are really excited about. I don't think that it's likely to be harmful. However, it's not very well studied in kids. So again, it's a little bit better studied in adults. If it works for your child, I don't think there's any reason not to do it. If you love the smell of that magnesium foot spray, just go for it. But go for it because you like the smell of it. That's how I feel about things like lavender, which also haven't been shown in research to directly improve sleep. But if you like it, if you like the smell of it and it's a good part of your bedtime routine, don't stop it.
Because it's soothing. If you like it, it's soothing you in some way, right? And that can be helpful.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So let everybody know about the book and where they can get the book, also where they can find you online so that they can learn more from you as well.
So my book is released March 4th, and the title of it is The Good Sleep Guide for Neurodivergent Kids. And my website is drmelisamoore.com. It's DRMELISA with one S, Moore with two O's, MOORE.com. And one thing about the book, it can be a reference in addition to something that you just want to read. And I know, Penny, on your website, you always have the 3 takeaways. And I'm so appreciative of that because we don't all have the time or energy to be dealing with that. And so if you get to a chapter and you feel like it doesn't apply to you or you're just too tired, at the end of each chapter, I have what I call tuck-in tips, and they're just kind of the nuggets from the chapter that are important. And I also have one pillow point at the end, and that's just one sentence. If you can only handle one sentence, that's okay. That's okay.
I love that. It was definitely designed for parents of neurodivergent kids. Because sometimes it's the little nugget is all we have time for. And other times it's like we need the whole big picture, and we can do that. So I love that. And I'm going to link all of that up, all of the book and your website and everything up for everyone in the show notes at parentingadhdandautism.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the work that you're doing, helping us with sleep. Sleep is one of those things that when our kids' sleep is disrupted, our sleep ends up disrupted. And then nobody's feeling good and nobody's able to do good. And it's really a core of being human to get the right amount of sleep. So I'm so thankful that you are really putting this together with neurodivergence and helping parents like me with our kids' sleep and then our own sleep, of course. So thank you. And thank you for being here.
I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. So
I'll see everybody next time. Take good care.